Today, we are digging into a massive problem, one that costs companies a fortune and, pushes their very best employees right out the door. And that problem? Inconsistent leadership. We're going to break down some really fascinating research from the Leadership Execution Institute that explains why so many organizations get this wrong, and, more importantly, how to start getting it right.
So, let's get right to the heart of the matter. Companies are pouring billions, literally billions, into leadership training, but their employee turnover rates, they barely move. So why is that? I mean, if all these managers are supposedly learning the right things, why are people still quitting? Well, this research points to a huge disconnect between what leaders learn and what they actually do when they get back to their jobs.
The real culprit here is what the research calls the reinforcement gap. Just think about it for a second. A manager goes to a training session, they learn some great new skills, they feel all inspired, and then what? They go right back to an absolute avalanche of emails, meetings, and deadlines. There's nothing in their day-to-day to help them practice or apply what they just learned. And in that gap, all those good intentions just kind of fade away, old habits creep back in, and that's exactly the moment you start losing good people.
Okay, so let's really unpack this. How does this gap directly poison a company's ability to hold on to its talent? This chart here just lays it all out. See, traditional training is a one-time thing. It's an event. It's all about transferring knowledge and then just, hoping some of it sticks. And the outcome? It's almost always inconsistent application. An execution system, though, is totally different. It's built right into the daily workflow. It's not about what you remember. It's about reinforcing the right behaviors in real time, which is what creates consistency. And that consistency, that's what makes people want to stay.
So the first toxic thing that comes out of this reinforcement gap is something called supervisor drift. Without any real-time guidance, managers just fall back on what's easiest for them. Their old habits, their personal preferences, or just gut reactions when they're under pressure. So you get one supervisor who's a micromanager and another who's totally hands-off. This isn't just a simple style difference. It's a failure in execution that creates confusion, crushes morale, and gets employees updating their resumes fast.
Oh, and it gets worse. Because when you have a whole bunch of supervisors all drifting off in their own directions, you get a much bigger problem, execution drift. Now you've got entire departments being managed inconsistently. The rules feel like they change from one day to the next, and that kind of chaos, that feeling of unfairness, it's like kryptonite for your best employees. Your A players will not put up with that.
And the final, most disastrous stage of this whole breakdown, that's cultural drift. This is where those fancy company values you have up on the wall, words like transparency, teamwork, respect, they become a complete joke because none of the leadership behavior actually reflects them. Trust just evaporates. The employee experience becomes a fractured mess, and you've basically built a system that is perfectly designed to churn through people.
So why does this keep happening? Well, it turns out it's not just about bad systems, it's actually rooted in predictable human psychology. Let's dive into the behavioral science behind why these problems are so darn persistent.
To really get to the bottom of this, the research gives us the PHONE framework. It's a handy acronym for 4 very human drivers that make leaders inconsistent: fear, overconfidence, negative impressions, and execution blindness. Let's break down exactly how each one of these quietly pushes your employees toward the exit.
First up, F is for fear. We all know this manager. They avoid giving tough feedback simply because they're afraid of having an awkward or difficult conversation. But for their employee, that silence isn't kindness, it's confusing. It creates a ton of anxiety when you have no idea where you stand. And believe me, people will leave a job just to find a boss who is willing to be clear and direct with them.
Next up, O is for overconfidence. This is that classic manager who thinks, hey, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know better than some corporate procedure. So they ignore the standards and just do their own thing. Well, this leads to wildly inconsistent performance reviews and a culture where it feels like favoritism is the rule. And your top performers, the ones who crave fairness and clear goals, they'll be the first ones to go.
N stands for negative impressions. This is the boss who is so worried about looking smart and being in control that they will never, ever admit they don't know something or ask for help. But that refusal to be vulnerable? It's not seen as strength. It's seen as a lack of honesty, and it absolutely destroys trust and makes the entire team disengage.
And finally, E stands for execution blindness. And this one is a really big deal. This is when the company as a whole is basically flying blind. They can see that a manager is hitting their sales numbers, but they have zero visibility into how they're getting those results. And behind the scenes,
That same manager could be creating a toxic environment that's about to make half their team quit, and the company has no idea until it's way too late.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem and we've looked at the very human reasons it keeps happening. It sounds a little bleak, I know, but there is a fix. So now, let's talk about the solution, something called a leadership execution system.
So what in the world is a leadership execution system? Well, don't let the name intimidate you. The best way to think about it is like a set of guardrails or helpful reminders that are built directly into a manager's daily tools. It's designed to give them real-time guidance at the exact moment they need it most, systemically fighting back against all those drift and phone factors we just covered.
So how does this actually play out in a normal workday? Let's look at the specific mechanics of how a system like this can protect your company from losing its most valuable people.
It's a pretty straightforward four-step loop. First, you stop just talking about your leadership standards and you actually build them into the software managers are already using. Second, they start getting automatic prompts and helpful suggestions at critical moments, like right before a one-on-one meeting or during a performance review. Third, this constant nudging reinforces the right habits until they become second nature. And finally, and this is key, you actually start measuring managers on their consistency, not just their end-of-quarter results. The whole focus shifts from what they know to what they consistently do. And when you make that fundamental shift, you start to see real, tangible results. Let's take a look at the measurable outcomes that come from achieving truly consistent leadership. This quote from the research really just hits the nail on the head. If you can't count on your supervisors to lead the same way, you don't have a leadership system. You have a consistency crisis. It's not about trying to find perfect managers. It's about building a stable, predictable system. And that stability is what gives people the security they need to stay and do their absolute best work.
And when you achieve that consistency, you directly fix the very issues that cause people to leave in the first place. Suddenly, accountability feels fair across different teams. Your star players are far less likely to get frustrated and leave. People can actually see a clear career path forward. Feedback becomes a reliable, supportive tool instead of a surprise. All of this works together to create an environment of psychological safety that leads to a huge reduction in burnout.
All right, let's bring this all together. What does a truly systemic approach to keeping your best employees actually look like?
If you remember just one thing from this entire explainer, please make it this. Leadership inconsistency is not a people problem. It is a system problem. It is a fundamental vulnerability in your company's operating system. And sending managers to another workshop is not going to fix it. The only way to make a lasting impact on retention is to build an execution system that reinforces the right behaviors every single day, right in the flow of work.
This institutional briefing is based on formal research. For anyone who'd like to dive deeper into the data, the research anchors are DOI 10.5281/Zenodo173941116, DOI 10.5281/Zenodo1742556, ORCID 0009-0004-6525-5634. Published by the Leadership Execution Institute, 2025. Implementation available through Call Center Coach.